Welcome back. This is the Press Club. Before the break, we were making the point about the two parties or whatever existing number we have coming together to agree on a criteria for the selection of candidates. What do you think about the statements by the guest speaker at the UWP convention, former Prime Minister Mr. Mitchell, in terms of, and I guess we can talk a little bit about Mary Isaac's comments, controversial comments that led to Stephenson King and his entourage walking out feeling disrespected by her, that a former leader naturally should have just stepped down. And the challenge to Mr. Shastri, if he loses the next election rather, that he should do the same and step down.
Well, I laughed when I heard it, and I've been laughing all the way since each time it is repeated, because Sir James Mitchell served for 4 consecutive terms, 4 consecutive 5-year terms, and at no point did he feel it was time to move on. If he's suggesting, as he said, that you should move on only when you lose, then it flies in the face of leadership, because leadership is supposed to, leaders don't lead parties into elections with a view to losing, you know, and the fact that a party lost an election does not necessarily mean that it deserved to lose. It could be that the other party did something that it didn't, insofar as, like we were speaking earlier, about what influences the vote. Is it money? Is it promises? Or is it, because I often say, if elections, try and imagine an election where campaigning was banned, where we say elections is going to be on the first day of January, and everybody knows that, but we're not going to have no campaigning because we want it to be a vote of conscience to allow people to vote as they would like to, free of being asked, you know, being their votes being solicited. I'm told that that is utopia because, you know, people will find ways and means. I mean, I was listening to a guy in Trinidad saying that votes were being solicited through the internet on his behalf, through a question that was being asked as to whether you'll vote for him. And he was saying, in as much as the people receiving that email might innocently feel that he's testing his ground, he's saying the email wasn't from him, it was from his opponents. To determine his strength, you know, so you could ban campaigning, but people will find ways and means of trying to influence the vote. So I think that Sir James Mitchell's suggestion that you should go once you lose is quite interesting. His request to Mr. Shastri for a promise that he would resign on the same night if he lost the election, and followed the example of Ed Miliband in the British Labour Party. After Cameron won the last election, Miliband resigned immediately after. Steve Harper, the Prime Minister of Canada, resigned immediately as soon as Justin Trudeau won. And Sir James is suggesting that Mr. Shastri should resign on the same night if the Electoral Office announces that the UWP lost. I can't remember hearing Mr. Shastri having responded, having said yea or nay. I doubt very much that he will offer a response, and I doubt very much that Mr. Shastri would agree to resign if he loses on his first outing, because if that is how he thought, then having lost Soufrière, he would decide he's not running any seat anymore. So he has, I think Mr. Shastri has 3 more. To conclude, I think he has 3 things to choose, 3 mountains to climb. 1, the immediate mountain to climb is winning the Miku South seat. And I don't take the view that it is unwinnable because the Labour Party has won it before with Cass Elias. Secondly, he has to be able to marshal a team that will be able to convince the St. Lucians that the United Workers' Party, under his leadership, as is a better alternative to the Labour Party.
That's a very high mountain.
Right, and thirdly, having climbed those two mountains, he would have to present a team that is capable of outshining any team that the Labour Party will come up with. Because remember, the Labour Party, which is going to determine the date of the election, hasn't even started talking about election date, hasn't even started talking about selecting candidates. So it doesn't sound to me that the election is around the corner. But then we never know how that goes, because the Prime Minister could go to sleep and wake up tomorrow morning and decide he's calling a snap election.
Would it be to his advantage to do that? I'm hearing a lot of talk about people, especially among the young people, no intention of voting next election because they are frustrated with the current government but not convinced that the UWP is presenting a desirable, a strong alternative to what exists currently. Could we see the emergence of what you're suggesting in terms of the parties coming together to settle on a criteria for candidates to come together to create a sort of an educational entity or campaign to get those young people educated about the electoral process and become more participatory?
I do not see the parties doing it on their own. Traditionally, traditionally each party will say who's going to start first. And I don't think the UWP is going to respond positively to a request from the SLP to come, let's sit and talk, talk politics, you know, or vice versa. In as much as, for example, both parties have complained, depending on whether they're in office or not, but both parties have complained in opposition and called for the need for campaign financing to be brought under control. I am aware that both parties have those concerns. I'm also aware that the OAS has provided both parties and the country generally with a blueprint in terms of how to deal with campaign financing. The commission, the Constitution Commission, also addressed that issue. But will either of the parties be prepared to do what the campaign financing recommendations are, which is that, number one, parties will have to register every financial contribution that they receive from members. They will have to register and report every contribution that they receive from supporters. They would have to register and report every contribution received at home and abroad from anybody or any institution. I am not sure that the parties are ready to do that, because what that would mean is that the public and the press would automatically, therefore, be able to tell how much each party went into the election with. And just imagine any party, a losing party, being able to say that it can prove that whereas that winning party declared $2 million, it can prove that it had more. You know, what happens? Will it mean that the election would be deemed null and void as a result of proof that the campaign financing law has been, you know? So I'm saying from that experience, I think the whole question of agreeing on a criteria for candidates, it can be less, it can lead to less opposition. You know, from the standpoint that it is a more holistic something that would benefit not just the parties, but also the country. Insofar as whether something like that would attract the youth vote, because voter apathy is not related only to youth. I mean, there's hardly a party across the Caribbean that can get over 60% of the electorate to come out and vote. It's always around 50–55%. In the case of St. Lucia, that 50 to 55% constitutes a floating vote, the middle class, of about 5%. That determines who wins or who doesn't. So the parties tend to try to please and win over that 5%, your middle class, your middle ground, your public servants, your teachers, etc., and in such a way do not necessarily pay as much attention as they should to other sectors of the voting population, the workers, the unemployed, the women, the elderly, you know, all sections of the population, the youth. I was looking for this, and in my radio program, I made the point all of this week is that here we were observing a whole week of rights associated with children. But guess what, Kendall? I didn't have one activity that was organized to include children where they would be asked, what do you know about your rights and what rights do you want? Well, apparently it was done. And there was one workshop held at the Bay Gardens. And I'll read a brief letter that was in this weekend's In Today's Star on page 4. The headline is Students at Child Research Symposium Angered by Leaders. And the article is by one Kristen Severin. And it says, I quote, "Sir," that is the editor, "I am a 13-year-old student and I am disturbed by the attention our officials give to matters which are important. Today," that was Thursday, November 19th, "students around the island were engaged in a child research symposium which was held at the Bay Gardens Hotel. At the beginning of this symposium, we were graced with the presence of many a distinguished guest, including the Minister of Health. In her opening remarks, she assured us that she was interested in what we had to say and that our voices were important. However, when the actual presentations by the students were being made, the officials, who in my opinion have the power to effect the changes that we are proposing, they all left. All who were left were the teachers and students. Many students were angered. We spent hours preparing those presentations, and in my opinion, they fell on deaf ears. How serious are we about change? How serious are we about listening to young people? In my opinion, this activity will go absolutely nowhere." Signed, Kristen Severin. And that reflects what I was talking about yesterday. You know, to what extent are we talking to, and in this case, listening to? You know, and that brings me back to your quality of your people who are elected. In this case, the Minister of Health is a minister of a large ministry with many departments, and I don't think it is fair to expect any minister to sit for an entire day in one place. But then sufficient thought wasn't given to what would happen in the event that the officials who can make the changes are not there. And if that is what happened, that when the students went to make their, because the whole thing was about research into what children need, how they feel, and what they would like from the society. So if when they were making their presentations, they were seeing it was just the same teachers after all of these preparations, that pessimism can be understood. And I think that on a wider level, it's okay for us today, after 36 years of independence, to, as a nation, always be willing to observe United Nations designated days. This week we had Students' Day, Children's Rights Day, Universal Children's Day, International Men's Day. And we're preparing to observe International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women on Wednesday coming, when a march has been organized. But at the end of the day, Kendall, the question is, Is the awareness working?
Yeah.
Are the marches working? If we know so much about children's rights, why are they still being violated? If we are saying so much and complaining so much about rape, why are we still getting more reports? Is it because more women are reporting, or is it because there are more rapes, or is it a chicken and egg situation? So that if historically for the past 36 years we've been marching, the declaration, the International Women's Day was first designated in 1975. So it's been 40 years since it has been and is being observed every year. How much of a difference has that made to the average St. Lucian woman or woman of the world feeling better about herself, feeling better about the way the society, the village, the country, the world reacts to them? There's an International Men's Day. What's that all about? What are men supposed to do on International Men's Day? Try and discover what problems we have?
We do for a break. Let's take a break. When we come back, we can continue our discussion on the value or point of International Men's Day and some of the other observances that we had this week. This is the Press Club. We'll be right back.